It was 2 a.m., and I was sitting in my car, parked outside of a hotel I had no business being near. The engine was off, but my mind was racing. I'd been following her for 3 hours, watching the little tracker I hid in her car blip across the map, waiting for it to stop. And when it finally did, it led me here, to the kind of cheap, out-of-the-way motel you see in crime shows. A place you drive past and never notice unless you're looking for it. Emily. My wife of 12 years. Mother of our kids. Right now, she was inside one of those rooms, and I didn't need to see who she was with to know what was happening. The thought made me sick, and yet, I couldn't stop myself from being there, watching. My fists were clenched so tight around the steering wheel that my knuckles had gone white, the blood drained out of them just like it felt it had drained out of my heart. But how did I get here? I guess, if I'm honest, I always knew. Maybe not at first, but over the past few months, things started adding up. Or rather, they started not adding up. Too many late nights, too many vague explanations, too many excuses that didn't make sense. It wasn't anything obvious. No secret texts, no lipstick on a collar, nothing cliché like that. It was more like a feeling I couldn't shake. A gut punch that lingered long after she left the house. I wasn't planning on catching her in the act, not at first. I just wanted to know what was going on. I needed to know if I was being paranoid or if there was really something more. So, I did the one thing I never thought I'd do, I installed a tracker in her car. I told myself it was temporary, that it was just to put my mind at ease. That it was harmless. But sitting here now, in the dark, heart pounding in my chest, I knew I had crossed a line. I hadn't intended to follow her. Not at first. But when I saw her car heading to a part of town where she never had any business being, I couldn't stop myself. My curiosity became obsession, and now I was here, sitting in this damn car, watching her betrayal unfold in real time. The minutes dragged by like hours. I imagined what was happening in that room, my imagination filling in the blanks with every worst-case scenario. My stomach twisted, and a part of me wanted to storm in there, kick down the door, and tear that place apart. But another part of me, a bigger part, wanted to keep sitting in the car, as if not seeing it would somehow make it less real. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, snapping me out of my trance. A message from her, working late, don't wait up. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. I could feel my pulse in my ears, my hands shaking as I threw the phone into the back seat. The rage was there now, clawing its way to the surface, burning hotter with every passing second. She was lying to me. Even now, even as she was in that room with whoever the hell he was, she had the nerve to text me like everything was fine, like she could cover it all up with a few words. I opened the glove compartment and pulled out the small recording device I'd brought with me. I didn't know why, but I needed evidence. Something concrete. Something I could confront her with later because, at this point, words weren't going to be enough. I got out of the car and made my way toward the motel room, staying close to the shadows, my heart hammering in my chest. This was it. The moment everything would change. I reached the door and paused, listening. I couldn't hear much through the walls, but enough to know I was right. Her voice, muffled and low, mingled with the deeper tones of someone else. My hand hovered over the door, tempted to knock, to kick it in, to do anything that would stop what was happening inside. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I planted the recording device near the doorframe and backed away, retreating to my car. As I sat behind the wheel again, waiting for her to leave, I realized something. I wasn't just here to catch her. I was here to watch the end of my marriage unfold. I sat there, gripping the wheel so hard I thought I might snap it in two. My phone buzzed again from the back seat, the little notification light blinking in the dark like some kind of twisted joke. Another message from her, probably. Another lie. I wasn't going to look at it. I didn't need to. The proof was right there, not more than 50 feet away, behind a cheap wooden door in a room that smelled like shame and broken promises. The minutes dragged on. I'd been sitting here for almost 2 hours, waiting. Waiting for her to come out, waiting for some sign that this nightmare wasn't real. But it was real. Too real. The kind of reel that makes you sick to your stomach and makes you question every single decision you've ever made. I wanted to get out of the car. I wanted to do something. Anything. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead, my hands glued to the steering wheel. All I could do was sit there, my mind running in circles, replaying every moment over the past year that didn't add up. Every late night, every time she said she had to work extra hours, every time she seemed a little too happy to leave the house. And now, here we were. Me, in the parking lot of a rundown motel, and her, inside with him. I didn't know who the hell he was, but I'd find out soon enough. The door finally opened. The light from inside spilled out onto the pavement, and I saw her. Emily. My wife. Looking around like she was making sure no one saw her. Like she could just slip out unnoticed and pretend this never happened. She was fixing her hair, her clothes a little too wrinkled for someone who had supposedly been working late. I slumped down in my seat, my heart pounding so loud I was sure she could hear it. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to see her face, to see the guilt in her eyes, or worse, the complete lack of it. She walked across the lot, her head down, moving quickly like she wanted to get the hell out of there as fast as possible. She didn't even see me. I waited until she got into her car, a few spaces down from mine, and watched her pull out of the lot. My hands were shaking as I grabbed the recording device from the glove compartment and shoved it into my pocket. I had no idea what I was doing anymore, but I couldn't just let her leave. Not like that. Not after what I'd seen. I followed her. Keeping a distance, making sure she didn't notice. She drove like she was on autopilot, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just destroyed everything we'd built together in that shitty little motel room. I felt like I was in a dream, like none of this could possibly be happening. But it was. And there was no waking up from it. She didn't go home. Instead, she took a detour through town, heading for some place I didn't recognize. I kept my distance, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe she was going to meet him somewhere else. Maybe this wasn't over yet. Maybe there was more to it than I even realized. But when she pulled into a 24-hour grocery store parking lot, I was confused. She parked and sat there for a minute, not moving, not getting out. I watched her from a few rows back, wondering what the hell she was doing. Was she just sitting there, thinking about what she'd just done? Or was she waiting for him to show up? Then I realized something, she was crying. I could see her in the dim light of the street lamp, her head leaning back against the seat, her hands wiping at her face. She looked like a mess. A broken, guilty mess. Good. She should feel guilty. She should feel like her world was falling apart, because mine sure as hell was. After a few minutes, she finally got out of the car and headed into the store. I sat there, waiting, not sure what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront her right there, in the middle of the frozen food aisle, make a scene, let the whole world see what a lying, cheating piece of shit she was. But I knew that wasn't the right move. Not yet. Not until I had more. Not until I had something she couldn't talk her way out of. She came out a few minutes later, carrying a plastic grocery bag. What the hell did she need to buy at 2 in the morning after screwing some guy in a motel? I didn't care. It didn't matter. What mattered was what happened next. I followed her again, this time all the way home. She parked in the driveway and sat there for a minute, probably composing herself before she walked inside and faced me. As if she could hide what she'd done. I watched her get out, grab her bag, and head for the front door. She paused for a second, taking a deep breath, then went inside. I waited. My mind was spinning, and I wasn't sure how I was going to do this. How do you confront someone you've trusted for over a decade? Someone you shared your life with, your bed, your kids. How do you even start that conversation? I didn't have an answer. But I had proof. The recording device in my pocket felt like a weight, pulling me down, reminding me that there was no turning back now. I had what I needed to end this. To end everything. I grabbed the device and got out of the car, walking slowly toward the house. The front door was still unlocked, like she wasn't expecting me to come home yet. I stepped inside, closing it quietly behind me. The house was dark, except for the faint glow coming from under the bedroom door. I could hear her in there, moving around, probably getting ready for bed. Like nothing had happened. I took a deep breath and walked down the hallway. My heart was pounding, my palms sweaty. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading, but also the moment I knew I had to face. There was no running from it now. I reached the door and pushed it open. Emily was standing there, halfway through pulling on her pajamas, and she froze when she saw me. Her face went pale, and for a second, I thought she might pass out. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She didn't need to say anything. Her eyes told me everything I needed to know. "Where the hell were you?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper, but laced with every ounce of anger I was holding back. She didn't answer right away. She just stood there, staring at me, her mouth slightly open like she was trying to find the right words. But there were no right words. Not for this. "Chris." She finally started, but I cut her off. "Don't. Just don't," I said, shaking my head. "I know where you were. I know what you were doing. So don't even try to lie to me." Her face crumpled, and she dropped onto the edge of the bed, her hands covering her face. She started sobbing, her whole body shaking, but I didn't feel sorry for her. "Not anymore." "How long?" I asked, my voice cold, detached. "How long has this been going on?" She didn't answer at first, just kept crying, her shoulders hunched over like she was carrying the weight of the world. Maybe she was. But that wasn't my problem anymore. "How long?" I repeated, my voice louder this time, sharper. She flinched but didn't look up. "A few months," she finally whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's only been a few months." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the silence of the room. "A few months? Jesus, Emily. You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around behind my back, and you think that makes it better?" She didn't respond, just kept sobbing into her hands. I stood there, watching her, feeling a strange mixture of anger and relief. At least now I knew. At least now there were no more secrets. I stood there, staring at her. Her sobbing filled the room, but it felt distant, like it was coming from another place. Maybe it was. Maybe the woman sitting on the edge of our bed wasn't really Emily anymore. The Emily I knew wouldn't have done this. Wouldn't have lied to me for months. Wouldn't have thrown away everything we'd built for, what? Some fling in a dirty motel? She tried to say something, but her voice cracked, the words barely making it out between her sobs. I wasn't in the mood to hear excuses. I'd heard enough lies already. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice flat. I didn't feel like yelling. Not anymore. I just wanted answers. Something to make sense of all this. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, her face streaked with tears. "It doesn't matter, Chris," she said, shaking her head. It meant nothing. I swear it didn't mean anything. I felt my jaw tighten, my teeth grinding together. Didn't mean anything? You're sitting here, telling me you've been sneaking around for months, and you're gonna say it didn't mean anything? She flinched at the anger in my voice but didn't back down. I don't know how it happened. It just did. It was stupid, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry? I laughed, but it wasn't because anything was funny. You're sorry? That's what you've got for me? After all this? After months of lies, you're sorry? What the hell do you expect me to do with that? I don't know, she whispered, her voice shaking. I don't know what you want me to say. Who is he? I repeated, my patience running thin. I needed to know. I needed to have a name. A face to put to this betrayal. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the floor like she was trying to find some way out of this. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. Chris, she said quietly, it doesn't matter who he is. I ended it. It's over. I just. It matters to me, I interrupted. You don't get to sit there and decide what matters now. You lost that right the moment you decided to spread your legs for someone else. That stung her. I could see it in her face, the way she recoiled like I'd slapped her. Good. She deserved to feel that. To feel a fraction of the pain she'd put me through. His name is Matt, she finally said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Matt. The name felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't know a Matt. I racked my brain, trying to put a face to the name, but came up with nothing. Who the hell was Matt? Was he some guy she worked with? Someone from the gym? A neighbor I hadn't noticed? How long? I asked again, my voice quieter now. I needed details. I needed to know how deep this betrayal went. A few months, she repeated, still not looking at me. It started after that fight we had in the spring. I tried to remember the fight she was talking about, but there had been so many. We weren't perfect. No one was. We argued like any couple does. But this? This wasn't just about a fight. This was something else. That's it? I asked, my voice dripping with disbelief. We had a fight, and your solution was to fuck someone else? She finally looked up at me, her face a mix of guilt and desperation. I wasn't thinking straight, Chris. Things between us, they haven't been good for a while. You know that. I needed something. I don't know. I can't explain it. It just happened. Needed something? I repeated, my voice cold. What about what I needed, Emily? What about what the kids needed? You didn't think about that, did you? I wasn't thinking, she cried, her voice breaking again. I didn't think it through. I know I messed up. I know that. But it's over. I ended it. I don't want him. I want you. I want us. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. Us? You want us? You expect me to believe that, after everything you've done? She stood up then, taking a step toward me, her hands outstretched like she thought she could fix this with a hug. Like she could make all of this go away with some tearful apology and a promise that it wouldn't happen again. But I wasn't interested in any of that. Chris, please, she begged, her voice desperate. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work on it. I'll do anything, I swear. I love you. I love you so much. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I stepped back, putting more distance between us. I didn't want her anywhere near me. Not now. Maybe not ever again. Do you even hear yourself right now? I asked, my voice low and full of contempt. You love me? Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night? Is that what you told yourself every time you snuck out to meet him? That you love me? It wasn't like that, she insisted, shaking her head. I wasn't thinking clearly. I made a mistake, but I'm telling you, it's over. It meant nothing. It meant something to me, I shot back. You destroyed everything, and you're standing here telling me it meant nothing? Jesus, Emily, do you even realize what you've done? She was crying again, her hands covering her face as she sank back onto the bed, her whole body shaking. I'm sorry, she kept whispering. I'm so sorry. I stared at her, feeling numb. The anger was still there, burning under the surface, but it was starting to give way to something else. Something colder. Something final. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said quietly, my voice barely more than a whisper now. Sorry doesn't erase what you did. Sorry doesn't make it go away. I know, she whispered. I know it doesn't. But please, Chris, I love you. I'll do anything to make it right. Just give me a chance. Please. I watched her, wondering how the hell we'd gotten to this point. How the hell she could stand there, after everything, and expect me to just forgive her? To act like this was something we could fix with a few therapy sessions and some empty promises. Do you even love him? I asked, the words bitter in my mouth. No, she said immediately, shaking her head. It was never about love. I don't feel anything for him. I ended it. It's over. I want to be with you. I didn't believe her. Not really. How could I? Everything she'd said, everything she'd done, had been a lie. Even now, standing here in front of me, begging for another chance, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more. That she wasn't telling me everything. You want to be with me? I repeated, my voice flat. You want to work on us? After all of this? Yes, she whispered. Please, Chris. Please just give me a chance to make it right. I love you. I love our family. I don't want to lose that. I felt the words hanging in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Didn't know if I could believe anything she said. But what I did know was that things would never be the same again. Get out, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face full of confusion and fear. What? Get out, I repeated, louder this time. I can't look at you right now. I don't even want to be in the same room as you. So get out. She hesitated, her eyes wide, like she couldn't believe what I was saying. But I wasn't going to repeat myself again. Without another word, she stood up and walked to the door, her shoulders hunched, her sobs barely contained. She paused for a second, like she was waiting for me to stop her, but I didn't move. I just watched as she left the room, the door clicking softly behind her. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she'd been. The silence of the house wrapped around me after she left, but it wasn't comforting. It was the kind of silence that follows after something breaks. And Emily had broken everything. I sat on the edge of the bed for what felt like hours, staring at nothing. There wasn't any point in trying to process it right now. It was too much. Too raw. I couldn't even think straight. I just knew one thing, I couldn't let this slide. She thought she could cry her way out of this, like she always did whenever we argued. Like a few apologies, some tears, and promises she couldn't keep would fix this. Not this time. This wasn't some little fight. This wasn't some disagreement about money, or kids, or whose turn it was to take the trash out. No, this was something else. Something deeper, something that cut into me in a way I didn't think was possible. And now, all I could think about was making her feel that same pain. I needed her to know what it felt like to be betrayed, to be blindsided by the person you trusted most. She couldn't just walk away from this without consequences. I wasn't going to let her. The first thing I did was grab her phone from the dresser. She'd left it there in her rush to escape the confrontation, probably assuming I wouldn't touch it. Idiot. I thumbed through it, looking for more proof of her betrayal. Pictures. Messages. Anything. And there it was, in plain sight, like she didn't even care to hide it. All the messages between her and Matt. There was nothing innocent about it. They weren't just flirting, this was a full-blown affair. Sexts, late-night I miss you texts, plans for their next secret rendezvous, everything. It made me sick to read it, but at the same time, it fueled the fire in me. They had been doing this for months, and she was still lying to my face, telling me it was nothing. But now, I had the proof. I took screenshots of every message, every incriminating detail, and sent them to myself. This was just the beginning. She thought she could lie her way out of it, but she didn't realize who she was dealing with. I wasn't going to do anything reckless like storming over to Matt's house and beating the shit out of him, though the thought was tempting. No, that would be too easy for both of them. I wanted something that would hurt more. Something that would make them both regret every second they'd spent together. The idea hit me when I saw a message from Matt asking if she was free for another meeting next week. A date, just like the one she had tonight, except now I knew exactly where they'd be. I smiled to myself as the plan started to form. If she thought she was going to get away with this, she was about to learn the hard way how wrong she was. The next morning, I got up early, like I always did, but there was no pretending today. No more fake smiles or polite conversations while we tiptoed around each other. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes swollen from crying, but I didn't care. I walked past her without saying a word and went straight to my office. I had work to do. My first stop was the lawyer's office. I made an appointment for that afternoon. There was no way I was sticking around for marriage counseling, and I sure as hell wasn't going to forgive her for what she'd done. I wanted a divorce, and I wanted it on my terms. I wasn't going to let her weasel her way out of this and keep half of everything we'd worked for. No, I was going to make sure I walked away with as much as possible. I spent the morning gathering every piece of evidence I had. The texts, the photos, screenshots of her location history, everything. I compiled it into a folder and made sure it was organized. I didn't want there to be any room for her to argue or try to paint me as the bad guy in this. I was the one who had been betrayed, and I was going to make sure the court knew it. By the time I was done, it was nearly lunchtime. Emily hadn't said a word to me all morning, which was fine by me. I didn't want to hear her voice. The sound of it made me sick. I needed space to think, to plan. I was about to blow up her entire world, and she had no idea what was coming. The next part of my plan involved Matt. I wasn't just going to ruin Emily's life. No, that wouldn't be enough. I wanted him to feel the consequences too. He was just as guilty in this as she was, maybe more. He'd been the one who pursued her, who manipulated her into this affair. Or at least, that's what I was telling myself. It didn't matter if it was true. What mattered was that they both paid. I spent the afternoon doing a little digging into Matt. I found his social media profiles, his work information, even some details about his personal life. Turns out, he was married too. Perfect. His wife had no idea what her husband had been up to, but she was about to find out. I drafted a simple message, attached the screenshots of his conversations with Emily, and sent it to her. I could only imagine what that conversation was going to look like. The shock on her face when she realized her husband was cheating. The tears. The yelling. The fallout that would come after. It was exactly what I wanted. He wasn't going to get off easy. That evening, when Emily came home from work, I was waiting for her. She had no idea what I'd done, but that was about to change. She walked into the house, her eyes avoiding mine as usual, and started to head upstairs. "Emily," I said, my voice cold and emotionless. She froze on the stairs, turning to look at me. "What?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk," I said, motioning for her to sit down at the kitchen table. She hesitated for a second but finally nodded and came to sit across from me. I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew something was coming, but she didn't know how bad it was going to be. "I went to see a lawyer today," I said, my tone matter of fact. "I'm filing for divorce." Her face went pale, and she opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't let her. "Don't bother trying to talk me out of it," I continued. "This is happening, and there's nothing you can say that's going to change my mind." She sat there in stunned silence, her hands trembling in her lap. "Chris, please. Can't we talk about this? Can't we at least try to fix things?" I shook my head. "No, we can't. You made your choice when you decided to screw around with Matt. This isn't fixable." Tears welled up in her eyes again, but I wasn't moved. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me with her crying anymore. "And just so you know," I added, leaning back in my chair, "I've already sent everything to his wife. So you might want to prepare for some fallout on that front." Her eyes widened in shock. You what?" "I sent her all the messages. All the proof. She knows everything now." Emily looked like she was about to be sick. She leaned forward, burying her face in her hands as the reality of what I'd done sank in. "How could you do that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. I shrugged. How could you? You're the one who ruined everything, Emily. I'm just making sure there are consequences. She didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there crying into her hands. I watched her, feeling a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't enough to erase the hurt, but it felt good to see her squirm. To know that her perfect little affair was blowing up in her face. She thought she could control this, that she could keep it hidden, but she was wrong. When she finally lifted her head, her face was red and blotchy from crying. What now? She asked, her voice small and broken. Now, I said, standing up, you pack your things and find somewhere else to stay. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here. Chris, I don't have anywhere to go, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Please, just give me some time to figure this out. I've given you enough time, I said, my voice hard. You have until tomorrow to get out. After that, I'm changing the locks. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. Please, Chris. We can fix this. We can figure it out. There's nothing to fix, I said, turning my back on her. You made sure of that. The next morning, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I sat in the living room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, staring at the clock as it ticked away the minutes. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but there was a heaviness in the air that made everything feel like it was hanging by a thread. Emily hadn't come downstairs yet. I figured she was up there, packing her things, knowing she couldn't stay any longer. She'd cried herself to sleep last night, I'm sure of it. I didn't care. I knew she'd try to stall. Try to get me to give her more time. That was her way, stall, beg, cry, anything to get out of the consequences. But not this time. I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to bend. She had until noon to get her stuff and leave, or I was throwing it all out on the front lawn. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. Slow, hesitant. I didn't look up. I just sat there, waiting, staring into my cup like there was something in there that would tell me what to do next. Chris? Her voice was small, fragile, like she didn't even want to hear herself speak. I looked up, and there she was, standing in the doorway, looking like a shell of the woman I used to know. Her hair was a mess, her eyes red and swollen. She clutched a small duffel bag in her hand, like she was still trying to pretend this wasn't happening. I'm leaving, she said, her voice trembling. I just need to talk to you before I go. I didn't say anything. I just gestured to the chair across from me, and she sat down slowly, her eyes never meeting mine. I could feel the weight of what was coming. The conversation we both knew was inevitable, but neither of us wanted to have. I don't know what to say, she started, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I know I destroyed everything. I kept quiet, watching her, waiting. She needed to say more than that. She needed to be the one to tear it all down now. I don't expect you to forgive me, she continued, her hands trembling in her lap. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. I don't know what happened, Chris. I don't know how I let it get this far. You let it get this far because you didn't care, I said, my voice cold and steady. You didn't care about me. You didn't care about the kids. All you cared about was yourself. She flinched, like I'd slapped her, but I didn't back down. I was done holding back. I'd given her enough chances to explain herself, and now it was time for her to face the truth. It wasn't like that, she whispered, tears filling her eyes again. I love you, Chris. I love you and the kids. I got lost. I don't know how to explain it. Lost? I repeated, my voice rising. You didn't get lost, Emily. You made a choice. You chose to cheat. You chose to lie to me. To your family. You weren't lost. You were selfish. She sat there, her shoulders shaking as she cried, but I didn't care. I couldn't care anymore. The woman I thought I loved had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and there was no going back from that. I know, she said through her sobs. I know I was selfish. I know I ruined everything. But I want to fix it. I'll do anything, Chris. I'll go to therapy, I'll quit my job, I'll. Quit your job? I interrupted, laughing bitterly. Like that's gonna fix this? This isn't about your job, Emily. This is about who you are. About the choices you made. You think quitting your job is gonna make me forget about what you did? She shook her head, her tears falling freely now. No. I know it won't. I don't know what to do, Chris. I don't know how to make this right. You can't make it right, I said, my voice harsh. You can't undo what you did. You can't take back the months you spent lying to me, sneaking around, fucking some guy behind my back. That's not something you can fix. She was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands, and for the first time in a long time, I felt nothing. No pity. No sympathy. Just the cold, hard truth that this was over, and there was no salvaging it. I don't want to lose you, she whispered, her voice barely audible through her tears. I don't want to lose our family. You already lost me, I said quietly. You lost me the moment you decided to cheat. You just didn't realize it yet. She looked up at me then, her eyes wide with desperation. Please, Chris. Please don't do this. I love you. I love our family. I'll do anything to fix this. I shook my head, standing up from the table. There's nothing left to fix, Emily. You broke it. You broke us. She stood up too, reaching out to grab my arm, but I pulled away before she could touch me. Please, she begged, her voice cracking. Please don't walk away from us. From the kids. This isn't about the kids, I said, turning to face her. I'll always be there for them. But you? I'm done. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. She collapsed back into the chair, her sobs filling the room, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked out of the kitchen, grabbing my keys from the counter. I needed air. I needed to get out of this house, away from her, away from everything. As I reached the front door, I heard her call out one last time. Chris. I'm sorry. I paused for a moment, my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn around. I didn't say anything. I just opened the door and walked out, closing it softly behind me. I drove for hours, not really knowing where I was going. I just needed to be away from the house, away from the memories, away from everything that reminded me of her. The streets were mostly empty, the city still waking up as I cruised down familiar roads that now felt foreign. I ended up at a park on the edge of town. It was the kind of place we used to take the kids when they were younger, back when everything was simpler. Back when we were still a family. I sat on one of the benches, staring out at the empty playground, my mind racing with everything that had happened in the past few days. I wasn't sure what to feel. Anger? Sadness? Relief? It all felt jumbled together, a mess of emotions that I couldn't sort through. Part of me wanted to feel something, anything, but the other part of me just wanted to shut it all off. The divorce papers were filed. That was the next step. I had everything ready. I knew that once Emily saw them, reality would hit her harder than it ever had before. This wasn't just a fight. This wasn't something that would blow over in a few days. This was the end. The end of us. The end of everything we'd built together. And yet, as I sat there, staring at the playground where our kids used to laugh and play, I couldn't help but wonder how we got here. How we went from being that couple with so much love and potential to this. Strangers. Strangers who had shared a life, a bed, and now couldn't even look each other in the eye. I thought about the kids. Daniel and Sophie. They didn't know yet. They had no idea what was happening, no idea that their mother had destroyed our family. And when I told them, it would change everything. They would hate her. Maybe they would even hate me for not trying harder to make it work. But I couldn't stay in a marriage like this. I couldn't live with someone who had betrayed me so completely. Staying for the kids wasn't enough. Not when every day I would look at her and remember what she did. What she took from me. I pulled out my phone, staring at the home screen. A picture of the four of us, smiling at the beach during last year's vacation. I wanted to delete it. To erase that memory, to erase everything about our life together, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. When I got home later that afternoon, the house was empty. Emily was gone. Her car, her things, everything. There was a note on the kitchen counter, but I didn't read it. I didn't need to. I knew what it would say. I sat down at the kitchen table, the silence pressing in around me. This was it. This was my life now. Alone. And as much as I wanted to feel something about it, I couldn't. Not yet. The silence of the house was different now. It wasn't the uncomfortable quiet that had filled the space for months, the kind that felt like you were holding your breath, waiting for something to break. This was the kind of silence that came after the breaking. The kind that settled in when the dust had cleared, and there was nothing left to say. Emily was gone. Her car, her things, everything. I hadn't even checked the note she'd left on the kitchen counter. It didn't matter. I knew what she'd written, another apology, another desperate plea for forgiveness that I wasn't going to give. I sat there for a while, staring at the folded piece of paper as if it would somehow vanish if I ignored it long enough. But it stayed there, a reminder that she had walked out, just like I'd told her to. For a brief moment, I thought about what the kids would say when they realized their mother was gone. It was Saturday, and they'd been staying at their friend's house for the weekend. They'd come back soon, expecting things to be like they always were. But nothing was the same anymore, and I didn't know how to explain that to them. I wasn't even sure I understood it myself. I got up, grabbed the note from the counter, and crumpled it in my fist without reading it. Tossing it into the trash felt symbolic, like I was throwing out the last piece of her. Maybe it was dramatic, but I didn't care. There was nothing left between us. I wasn't going to hang on to her words, to her excuses. I sat back down at the kitchen table, my mind racing with everything that had happened. The divorce papers were ready, filed, set in motion. There was no turning back now, even if she wanted to. I had made my decision. She was out of my life for good. And yet, as I sat there, staring at the empty space where she used to sit, I couldn't help but think back to how it all started. 12 years of marriage, gone in an instant. Well, not an instant. It had been unraveling for months, maybe even longer. I just hadn't seen it coming. Or maybe I had, and I'd ignored it because it was easier to pretend things were fine than to face the truth. The kids would ask why. Why did Mom leave? Why is everything different? How could I explain it to them without destroying whatever image they had of her? It wasn't their fault, and I didn't want them growing up hating their mother. But how could I tell them the truth without making them see her the way I saw her now? As someone who had betrayed everything we built, someone who had chosen to tear apart our family for nothing more than a cheap affair. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to shake the thought out of my head. I couldn't sit here dwelling on it. Not now. I had things to do. I needed to move forward, to figure out what came next. I wasn't about to let Emily's choices define the rest of my life. I grabbed my phone and called my lawyer. I had a few more details to iron out, and I needed to know exactly where we stood in terms of the house, custody, and everything else that came with this mess. My lawyer had been thorough, but I wasn't about to leave anything to chance. I wasn't going to let Emily walk away with more than she deserved. After a short conversation, I hung up, feeling more focused. The divorce would take time to finalize, but I was ready. There wouldn't be any drawn-out battles or fights over the house. The kids were the only thing that mattered now, and I would make sure they stayed with me. Emily could have her weekends, her visits, whatever. But this house? This was going to be their home. I spent the rest of the afternoon going through the house, picking up little things that reminded me of her. Pictures of the four of us at the beach, a few random keepsakes we'd picked up over the years, stuff she hadn't taken with her. I threw it all in a box and stuck it in the garage. Out of sight, out of mind. I didn't want any of it hanging around, reminding me of what we'd lost. Later, I sat down in the living room, the TV on in the background, though I wasn't really watching. I kept thinking about how to tell the kids. It wasn't just about explaining that their mom had left. It was about helping them understand that none of this was their fault. They didn't need to know the details, at least not yet. They were too young to understand the ugliness of it all. I grabbed my phone again and texted Daniel and Sophie's friends' parents, letting them know I'd be picking the kids up tomorrow morning. I wasn't ready to see them today, not while everything still felt so raw. I needed another night to figure out what to say, how to say it. Maybe by tomorrow, I'd have something more than just the basic explanation of Mom isn't living here anymore. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to shake the weight of the last few days off my shoulders. Emily's betrayal had hit me like a truck, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't surprised. I'd known for a while that things were off between us. I'd just chosen to ignore it, to pretend that we could fix it with time. But time hadn't fixed anything. Time had only made the cracks bigger until they finally split open. I thought about Matt. About what his wife must be going through now that she knew. I hadn't heard anything from her, but I wasn't expecting to. It wasn't my place to follow up, to check on her. I'd done what I set out to do, I'd blown up Emily's affair, and now they both had to deal with the fallout. If Matt's wife wanted to stay with him, that was her choice. But I wasn't about to stick around to see how it played out. Emily had probably already heard from Matt by now. Maybe they'd talked, maybe they hadn't. I didn't care. She wasn't my problem anymore. She could deal with the mess she'd made. As the evening crept on, I realized I hadn't eaten anything all day. I went to the kitchen and opened the fridge, but nothing looked appealing. I wasn't hungry. Not really. I grabbed a beer instead and headed back to the living room, sinking into the couch as I took a long sip. I kept thinking about the future. What would life look like now? The divorce would be finalized eventually, and then what? I'd be a single dad, raising 2 kids on my own. It wasn't what I'd planned, but then again, none of this was. I thought back to the early years of our marriage, when everything seemed so simple. We were happy, or at least we thought we were. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted, and we'd grown apart. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I hadn't paid enough attention to her, hadn't noticed the little things that were slipping away. But no matter how I tried to spin it, it didn't change the fact that she had made the choice to cheat. She had crossed the line, and now we were both paying the price. I wasn't sad anymore. I was tired. Tired of thinking about it, tired of replaying the same arguments in my head. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to move on, to focus on the kids, on my life without her. I didn't know what that life looked like yet, but I knew one thing for sure: it would be better than living with someone who didn't respect me, who didn't value what we had. I finished my beer and set the bottle down on the coffee table, staring at the TV without really seeing it. The kids would be home tomorrow, and I'd have to face the reality of explaining everything to them. But for now, I had one more night of peace, one more night to let the silence settle in before everything changed again. The next morning, I picked up Daniel and Sophie from their friend's house. They were laughing, happy, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. As we drove home, they chattered on about their weekend, excited to be back, asking if Mom was home yet. I took a deep breath, my hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "We need to talk when we get home," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. They didn't ask any questions, but I could see the confusion on their faces. They knew something was up, but they didn't know what. Not yet. When we got home, I sat them down in the living room. My heart raced as I looked at their innocent faces, knowing I was about to shatter the world they knew. "Mom isn't going to be living here anymore," I said, my voice calm but heavy with the weight of what I was saying. They stared at me, their eyes wide, trying to process what I'd just told them. "Why?" Sophie asked, her voice small and scared. "It's complicated," I said. "But this doesn't change anything between you and Mom. She loves you both, and she'll still see you. You'll still have time with her. It's just, things between Mom and I aren't working anymore. Daniel looked away, biting his lip, while Sophie's eyes filled with tears. I know it's hard, I continued. But this isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. And I'm going to be here for you, always. I didn't know if they understood everything I was saying, but I could see the fear in their eyes. They didn't need to know the details. They didn't need to know about the affair, about how badly Emily had broken my trust. All they needed to know was that I was still their dad, and I wasn't going anywhere. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the moment sinking in. Sophie leaned against me, her tears soaking into my shirt, while Daniel sat quietly, staring at the floor. This was the new reality. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And as hard as it was going to be, we'd get through it. I would get through it. Eventually. And that's how it ended. 12 years of marriage, 2 kids, and a house full of memories, all reduced to this me, sitting in the living room with my children, trying to pick up the pieces of a life that had fallen apart. But life goes on, and so would we. Emily would get her weekends, her time with the kids, but I wasn't looking back. I'd given her enough chances, enough of my time, and now it was time to focus on myself and my kids. We'd figure it out. Day by day. Because, in the end, that's all you can do. Move forward.